Let them watch.
I feel their eyes.
The Duke and his mistress, how brazen. And the poor Duchess standing alone.
Duchess.
I watched my husband choose his mistress in front of 300 guests, and I did not flinch. The ball at Ravenswood Castle was the event of the Edinburgh season, the Duke of Montrose's annual celebration of his own magnificence, where the finest families in Scotland gathered to admire his wealth and court his favour. I had been his Duchess for 11 years, and I had attended this ball 11 times, each year more invisible than the last. This year, he had outdone himself. Lady Genevieve Blackwood stood at the centre of the ballroom in a gown of crimson silk, her dark hair elaborately arranged, her beauty undeniable even at 38. She was a widow, wealthy in her own right, sophisticated and calculating. She had been pursuing my husband for months, and tonight, apparently, she had caught him. The Duke, my husband, Alexander Montrose, led her onto the dance floor for the third consecutive waltz, a violation of protocol so blatant that even the most oblivious guests could not miss its significance. His hand rested possessively on her waist. His head bent close to hers, murmuring intimacies that made her laugh. I stood at the edge of the room, 45 years old, dressed in dove-grey silk because the Duke had decreed I should not outshine his guests, and I watched my marriage end. Not legally, of course. Divorce was impossible, scandal unthinkable, the practicalities of our situation immutable. I would remain the Duchess of Montrose until one of us died. But whatever pretense of partnership had existed between us, and there had been precious little, evaporated in that third waltz. I should have felt devastation. I should have wept, raged, caused a scene that would have given the gossips material for months. Instead, I felt nothing. 11 years of numbness had prepared me for this moment. 11 years of being overlooked, dismissed, reduced to a function rather than a person. The Duke had married me for my fortune and my family's political connections. He had never pretended otherwise. What he was doing now was merely the logical conclusion of a transaction that had never included affection. I turned to leave the ballroom, seeking the quiet of the terrace where I could breathe without being observed. That was when I saw him watching me. The Earl of Thornwood stood near the orchestra, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his grey eyes fixed on my face with an intensity that made my breath catch. He was perhaps 50, silver-haired, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that spoke of a life lived rather than merely performed. I knew who he was, of course. Everyone in Scotland knew William Sinclair, Earl of Thornwood. A widower of 15 years, a political rival of my husband's, a man whose reputation was built on integrity rather than manipulation. We had never spoken. But he was looking at me now as though he saw something worth seeing. As though I were a person rather than a piece of furniture inconveniently placed in the corner. When he began walking toward me, I discovered that I was not as numb as I had believed. If you want to know what the Earl said to the Duke's abandoned bride, and what happened when someone finally saw her, subscribe right now. This channel is just beginning, and every single subscriber helps us reach 10,000. Stay with me. This story is about to reveal what happens when neglect meets genuine attention. My name is Catherine Montrose, Catherine Sinclair before my marriage, though the irony of sharing a surname with the Earl would only occur to me later. I had been raised to be a duchess. My family, the Sinclairs of Aberdeen, were wealthy in land and ambition but lacking in title. When the Duke of Montrose expressed interest in an alliance, my father had been triumphant. The combination of Montrose prestige and Sinclair resources would create a political force capable of shaping Scottish affairs for generations. I had been part of that alliance, the currency exchanged for influence. At 34, I had been considered past my prime but still acceptable. The Duke was 43, recently widowed, in need of a wife who could manage his household and provide heirs. The arrangement was purely practical on both sides. I had not expected love. But I had expected respect. What I received instead was 11 years of systematic diminishment. The Duke consulted me on nothing, informed me of nothing, treated me as though my existence was a minor inconvenience to be tolerated rather than acknowledged. The heirs he had expected never arrived. My body failing repeatedly to produce the children he demanded, and each failure had pushed me further into irrelevance. By the time of that ball at Ravenswood Castle, I had become a ghost in my own home. I occupied the Duchess's chambers but wielded none of the Duchess's authority. I attended functions but was never introduced as anything more than a necessary accessory. I existed in a permanent state of present absence. Lady Genevieve's emergence as my husband's mistress was not the beginning of my displacement. It was merely its public acknowledgement. And yet, when the Earl of Thornwood approached me on that terrace, I felt something I had forgotten was possible. Hope. Your Grace. The Earl's voice was deep, measured, carrying the soft burr of the Scottish Highlands where his estate lay. He stopped at a respectful distance, offering a formal bow that seemed somehow more genuine than the perfunctory gestures I received from my husband's allies. Lord Thornwood. We have not been introduced. We have not. But I have observed you for many years, at functions such as this one. He paused. I have observed how you are treated. And I have found it unconscionable. I blinked, uncertain how to respond to such directness. That is a strong word. It is an accurate one. The Duke of Montrose has one of the finest women in Scotland as his wife, and he parades his mistress before her as though she were invisible. His grey eyes held mine steadily. You are not invisible, Your Grace. You have simply been surrounded by people too blind to see you. You speak very freely for a stranger. I speak honestly, which is apparently unusual in your experience. I apologize if it causes discomfort. It does not cause discomfort. I turned to look out over the castle gardens, unable to maintain eye contact with such intensity. It causes confusion. I am not accustomed to being noticed. That is precisely my point. He moved to stand beside me at the balustrade, his presence warm but not intrusive. I have watched you at a dozen events over the past 5 years. I have seen how you carry yourself with dignity despite constant humiliation. I have seen how you manage conversations with grace when your husband cannot be bothered to remember your existence. I have seen a woman of remarkable character being systematically diminished by a man who does not deserve her. Why did you never speak to me before? Because speaking to another man's wife is improper, regardless of how that man treats her. But tonight. He paused. Tonight, I watched him dance 3 waltzes with his mistress while you stood alone in a grey dress that hides rather than reveals, and I found that propriety was no longer sufficient reason for silence. What is sufficient reason for speech? The conviction that someone should tell you what your husband apparently never has. He turned to face me fully. You are extraordinary, Your Grace. Your patience, your composure, your refusal to be destroyed by circumstances that would have broken most people, these are rare qualities. And you deserve to know that at least one person in this gathering has noticed them. I felt tears threatening, something I had not allowed in years, and I forced them back through sheer will. You do not know me, Lord Thornwood. You have observed me from a distance. That is not the same as knowing. You are right. It is not. He reached into his jacket and produced a calling card, pressing it into my hand. If you ever wish to be known, truly known, by someone who would value the privilege, I will be at Thornwood Hall. An hour's ride from Edinburgh. My door is always open to you. He bowed again and walked away, leaving me on the terrace with his card in my hand and a question I had never thought to ask myself. What would it feel like to be seen? This is where the possibility begins. If you are feeling this moment of unexpected recognition, drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. I read every single one. Subscribe. Like this video. Help us reach 10,000 subscribers. I did not use the Earl's card immediately. What would have been the point? I was a married woman, bound by vows that could not be broken regardless of how thoroughly my husband had violated his own obligations. Visiting a widower's estate would be improper, scandalous, potentially ruinous to whatever remnants of reputation I still possessed. But I kept the card. I tucked it into the small jewelry box where I stored items too precious for the Duke's inspection, letters from my late mother, a lock of hair from my stillborn daughter, mementos of a life that had once held meaning. The Earl's card joined these relics, a symbol of a possibility I could not pursue but could not quite abandon. The months following the ball were difficult. Lady Genevieve became a permanent fixture in my husband's life. She attended functions at his side, occupied the place of honor at dinners, received gifts and attention that should have been mine by right. The household staff, sensing the shift in power, began to treat me with barely concealed condescension. I endured it all, as I had endured everything before. But something had changed. The Earl's words echoed in my mind during the long, lonely evenings when the Duke was entertaining his mistress and I sat alone in my chambers. You are extraordinary. You deserve to know that at least one person has noticed. Someone had noticed. Someone had seen me, not as a failed wife or a barren vessel or a political transaction, but as a person worthy of attention. The knowledge was simultaneously comforting and tormenting. Proof that I could be valued, but also proof of everything my marriage denied me. 6 months after the ball, I made a decision. I wrote to the Earl. The letter was carefully composed, revised a dozen times, and still felt inadequate. I explained that I was grateful for his kind words at the ball. I noted that my circumstances had not improved, though I did not elaborate on the details. I mentioned that I sometimes rode in the countryside near Edinburgh and wondered if Thornwood Hall was as beautiful as its reputation suggested. It was not a proposition. It was not even truly an invitation. It was simply an acknowledgement that his attention had mattered, and a tentative opening for continued contact. His response arrived within a week. Your Grace. Your letter brought me more pleasure than I can adequately express. I have thought of you often since our conversation at Ravenswood Castle, wondering whether you were well, hoping that circumstances had improved though suspecting they had not. Thornwood Hall is indeed beautiful, particularly in spring when the gardens bloom. If you ever find yourself riding in this direction, you would be most welcome to visit. My housekeeper makes an excellent tea, and my library contains several volumes I suspect would interest a woman of your evident intelligence. I offer this invitation with no expectations and no improper intent. I simply believe that you deserve conversation with someone who values your company, and I would be honored to provide it. Yours respectfully, William Sinclair. I read the letter 3 times, memorizing its phrasing, interpreting its tone. Respectful but warm. Proper but inviting. A door opened without pressure to walk through it. 2 weeks later, I rode toward Thornwood Hall. The estate was an hour's ride from Edinburgh, as the Earl had said, close enough for a day's excursion, far enough to feel like escape. The hall itself was a modest manor of grey stone, surrounded by gardens that were indeed beautiful in the spring light. It was nothing like the ostentatious grandeur of Ravenswood Castle, and I found I preferred it immediately. The Earl met me at the door himself, dressed in country clothes rather than formal attire, his expression warm with genuine welcome. Your Grace. I hoped you would come. I hoped I would have the courage to. Courage is something you have never lacked. He stepped aside to allow me entry. Please, come in. Let me show you a home where you are actually wanted. That first visit lasted 3 hours. We took tea in a comfortable sitting room, surrounded by books and paintings that reflected a life of quiet cultivation rather than aggressive display. We talked about literature, about music, about the political situation in Scotland and the difficulties of managing estates during uncertain times. We did not talk about my marriage. Not because the subject was forbidden, but because it did not seem relevant. For the first time in 11 years, I was having a conversation with someone who was interested in my thoughts, my opinions, my experiences not as they related to the Duke, but as they existed independently. I felt myself coming alive again. The numbness that had protected me for so long began to thaw, and beneath it I discovered that I still had feelings, still had preferences, still had a personality that had been suppressed but not destroyed. You are different than I expected, I admitted, as our tea grew cold in forgotten cups. How did you expect me to be? I am not certain. Your reputation is one of seriousness, of moral rectitude. I expected someone stern. I am serious about things that matter. But I have also learned, through loss and solitude, that joy is worth pursuing wherever it can be found. He smiled slightly. My wife died 15 years ago. I spent the first 5 years of my widowhood being stern, as you put it. It accomplished nothing except making me miserable. What changed? I realized that mourning does not honor the dead. Living well honors them. So I began to live again. Reading, gardening, engaging with the world rather than withdrawing from it. He paused. I mention this because I recognize something similar in you. You have been mourning, Your Grace. Not a death, but a loss nonetheless. The loss of the life you should have had. That is, remarkably perceptive. I have had time to observe. And I have been paying attention. We are at the connection now. If you are feeling this growing understanding between two people who have been overlooked, share this video with someone who deserves to be seen. Subscribe. Help us reach 10,000 subscribers. Every single one of you matters. The visits became regular. Every fortnight, I rode to Thornwood Hall under the pretense of exercise and fresh air. The Duke did not notice my absences, he was too occupied with Lady Genevieve to care where his wife spent her time. The household staff, accustomed to my irrelevance, asked no questions. William, we had progressed to Christian names in private, though we maintained formality in public, became the confidant I had never had. I told him about my marriage, the systematic diminishment, the years of invisible suffering. He listened without judgment, offering sympathy without pity, understanding without condescension. In turn, he told me about his own history. His wife, Margaret, had been the love of his youth. A match of genuine affection rather than arrangement. They had been happy for 20 years before a fever took her, leaving him alone with their grown sons and a grief that had nearly destroyed him. I was not a good father during those early years of mourning, he admitted. My sons grew up watching me withdraw, and they learned to manage without me. When I finally emerged from my grief, they were grown men with lives of their own, and I discovered I had missed their becoming. Do you have a relationship with them now? We are cordial, affectionate, even. But there is a distance that I created through my absence, and I do not know if it can ever be fully bridged. He looked at me with an expression of rueful honesty. I tell you this so you understand that I am not without flaws. My moral reputation is deserved in some ways but masks failures in others. Everyone has failures. The question is whether we learn from them. That is a generous perspective. It is a realistic one. I have made my own mistakes, trusting my family's judgment about the Duke, failing to assert myself when assertion was still possible, accepting diminishment rather than fighting against it. I took a breath. I am trying to learn from those mistakes now. By visiting me. By being someone other than the ghost I became. By having conversations and opinions and relationships that are my own rather than assigned to me. I met his eyes. You are the first real choice I have made in 11 years. I want you to understand what that means. The Duke discovered my visits 6 months after they began. I was never certain how he learned of them, a gossiping servant, perhaps, or a neighbor who observed my regular rides in the direction of Thornwood Hall. The source mattered less than the result. He confronted me in my chambers, his face purple with rage that seemed disproportionate to the offense. You have been visiting the Earl of Thornwood. I have. We share literary interests and enjoy each other's conversation. You have been making me a laughingstock. My wife, consorting with my political rival while you publicly parade your mistress before all of Edinburgh. I kept my voice level, though my heart pounded with a combination of fear and something else. Something that felt almost like satisfaction. Do not speak to me of laughingstocks, Alexander. You have made me one for 11 years. He stared at me, apparently shocked that I had spoken back. I had not raised my voice to him since our first year of marriage, when I had learned that protests only made things worse. You will not see him again. Or what? You will divorce me? That would require scandal, and scandal would damage your precious position. I stood my ground, drawing on reserves of courage I had not known I possessed. You will not divorce me because you cannot afford to. And I will not stop visiting Thornwood Hall because it is the only thing in my life that brings me joy. I can make your life very difficult. My life is already difficult. You have spent 11 years ensuring that. I met his eyes steadily. Do your worst, Alexander. I have nothing left to lose. He left without another word, and I discovered that my hands were shaking. But I did not feel afraid. I felt alive. The Duke's revenge was petty but persistent. He reduced my household allowance to a pittance. He dismissed the servants who had shown me kindness, replacing them with staff loyal to Lady Genevieve. He excluded me from social events entirely, claiming I was ill or indisposed when questions were asked. I endured it all, sustained by my visits to Thornwood Hall and the friendship that had become the center of my existence. William was outraged on my behalf. This is persecution. He is punishing you for having the audacity to seek companionship when he denied you any. He is punishing me for refusing to be invisible. The companionship is almost incidental. I smiled slightly, though I admit the companionship makes the punishment bearable. Come here. Move to Thornwood Hall. I have rooms you could occupy, staff who would treat you with respect. And give him grounds for divorce on the basis of abandonment. Give him the scandal he claims to fear but secretly desires because it would free him to marry Lady Genevieve. I shook my head. I will not make it that easy for him. I will remain in my position, occupying my chambers, claiming my rights as Duchess, simply because it inconveniences him. That is remarkably stubborn. I learned stubbornness from 11 years of marriage. It is the only weapon I have left. William reached for my hand, holding it gently the first time we had touched beyond formal greetings. You are not alone in this fight. Whatever happens, whatever he does, I am with you. I know. I squeezed his hand. That is what makes it bearable. The situation resolved itself in an unexpected way. 2 years after our first conversation on the terrace, the Duke of Montrose suffered a seizure during a dinner with Lady Genevieve. He collapsed at the table, sending wine and china crashing to the floor, and was dead before the physician arrived. I learned of his death from a servant who seemed uncertain whether to offer condolences or congratulations. The Duke is gone, Your Grace. His heart gave out. I sat in my chambers, processing this information, trying to identify what I felt. Not grief, I had grieved the marriage years ago, mourned what it should have been and never was. Not relief exactly, though there was an element of that. More a sense of possibility. A door opening that had been locked for 11 years. I was a widow. I was free. The estate passed to the Duke's nephew, a young man I barely knew, who had no interest in maintaining the elaborate household his uncle had cultivated. Within months, Ravenswood Castle was being prepared for sale, and I was entitled to my widow's portion, a comfortable income that would allow me to live independently. I wrote to William immediately. The Duke is dead. I am free. I do not know what this means, but I wanted you to know. His response came by return messenger, delivered within hours rather than the days a letter would normally require. Come to Thornwood Hall. Come now. Come home. I arrived at Thornwood Hall 3 days after the Duke's funeral. William met me at the door, as he had that first visit years ago, but this time there was no need for formality, no pretense of proper distance between a married woman and a widower. You came, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Where else would I go? This is the only place I have felt seen in 11 years. He took my hands, holding them tightly, his grey eyes searching my face. I have something to ask you. Something I have wanted to ask for 2 years but could not, because you were not free to answer. Ask. Stay. Not as a visitor, not as a friend seeking refuge, but permanently. Stay and build a life here, with me, as my wife. I had known the question was coming. I had thought about it during the 3 days since the Duke's death, imagining this moment, preparing my answer. Yes. His face transformed with joy. The same expression I had glimpsed occasionally during our conversations, but magnified, unreserved. You are certain? I am 47 years old. I have spent the best years of my life in a marriage that offered nothing but diminishment. I know what misery feels like, and I know what happiness feels like. You are happiness, William. You have been happiness since the night you walked across that ballroom and told me I was worth seeing. You have always been worth seeing. The Duke was simply too blind to notice. We married quietly, 3 months after my widowhood began, soon enough to cause whispers but late enough to maintain technical propriety. Neither of us cared about the gossip. We had waited long enough already. We had 18 years together. 18 years of conversation and companionship, of gardens tended and books discussed, of the quiet happiness that comes from being truly known by another person. We traveled together, entertained friends, built a life that neither of us had expected to find so late. William died at 68, peacefully, with me beside him. I saw you, he said, near the end. That night at the ball. I saw you standing alone while your husband chose his mistress, and I thought, there is the bravest woman I have ever known. I was not brave. I was simply numb. You were brave. Numbness is how the brave survive when they have no other options. And then you found another option. He smiled weakly. You found me. The best option I ever chose. The only choice you ever needed to make. His hand tightened briefly on mine. I love you, Catherine. I love you too. I have loved you since the night you told me I was not invisible. He died the next morning. I lived another 12 years as the Dowager Countess of Thornwood, sustained by memories and by the knowledge that I had, at last, been truly seen. When I finally passed, I was buried beside William in the Thornwood family plot, my gravestone bearing the inscription I had requested. Here lies Catherine Sinclair, who was overlooked 4 years until someone saw her and loved what he saw. The Duke had chosen his mistress at the ball. But another Earl had seen his bride. And in seeing her, truly seeing her, he had given her the greatest gift anyone can receive, the knowledge that she was worth seeing all along. Thank you for staying with me through this entire story. If it moved you, if it reminded you that the people who overlook us do not define our worth, please subscribe. This channel is just beginning, and every single subscriber helps us reach 10,000. Share this video with someone who deserves to be seen. Comment where you are watching from. I read every single one, and I want to say hello to you. Like this video. Subscribe to our channel. Help us reach the people who need these stories. Until next time, remember, somewhere in the crowd, someone is watching not your performance, but your truth. Let them see you.